A close reading of the Homeric Odyssey, Episode 1, Book 1, lines 1 to 43. My name is Peter Gainsford. I'm a classical scholar in New Zealand, and here we begin going through the text of the Odyssey in a close reading. There are videos and podcasts on the Odyssey out there, but I tend to find them much too basic, plot summaries, that kind of thing. Cliff's Notes stuff for people who don't actually want to read the Odyssey. Now, the Odyssey is a ripping yarn, and you don't need extra help to read it, but when you do get into it, it is startlingly deep and intricate. People who are reading the Odyssey and who do want a bit of info on what's going on beneath the surface do need a bit of guidance. And that's what this is for. That's why we're here. My aim is to make this material accessible, both in video and audio format, so I'll be releasing video copies of this and an audio copy. To make the audio accessible, I will translate Greek words as often as I remember to, and give line numbers, read out all of the text anytime I'm going to be talking about any text. The video version, for example on YouTube, will have the added benefit that you will see the text on screen side by side with the Greek side by side with an English translation. And for each episode I will add references and bibliography in Annotations, not in the actual recording. This first episode isn't an introduction. I'm not going to be talking about date, composition, editions, commentaries, and so on. It's a big project. You know, if we do 50 lines per episode, it's going to be well over 200 episodes. So I need to build up some momentum. If I'm going to stand any chance of getting beyond the first few episodes, we need to plough straight into the text, and my present aim is that at a later date I will record another episode with a general introduction. So for now, let's start in on the text. The first 43 lines of the Odyssey. Let's go. Just for reference. Okay, I had better give this much of an introduction. If you're looking at the video version, you'll see on screen that we are using the Helmut van Thiel's edition of the text. There are two main critical editions to use, as you'll see in the annotations. For now, I'll just say that Van Thiel is the one that we are using. The other big one is M.L. West, and I will just show on the video version some references at the end of the annotated bibliography. So, the opening 43 lines contain one of the most talked about chunks of Homer. The so-called proem, or introduction, or introductory paragraph to the epic. This is a standard feature in Greek epic poetry. Before we get into what is a proem, let me just walk you through some of the thematic material, because people who are just popping in here are going to find that the most interesting aspect of what's going on here. So as you'll see, it starts off, tell me of the man muse of many ways, many journeys he wandered, when at Troy he sacked the sacred citadel. Many people he saw their cities, he knew their mind, many things on the sea, he suffered pains in his heart, and so on and so on. So this is all introductory. We're not actually getting into narrative until you get down to line 26, well, already 20, yeah, line 26 to 30 is where we transition into actual narrative. The opening 25 odd lines is introductory material. It comes, broadly speaking, the first 25 lines come, broadly speaking, in four main chunks. Chunk 1 is the first 5 lines, which are really about Odysseus himself. And then lines 6 to 25 are other circumstances surrounding the start of the story. What's happened in the past, where are things now, who is where, and so on. The first 5 lines, as I say, are about Odysseus himself. Famously, the very first word of the epic, andra, is the very first word is a shorthand way of naming the main theme, or one of the main themes of the epic, the man, the main character, Odysseus himself. Now, there's a few things to notice about this. First, notice that there is no name. Unless you're using a bad translation of the Odyssey, you will not find Odysseus mentioned by name in the first 20 lines. And this is thematically important, it's significant, it's deliberate. Moments when Odysseus is named or not named are important in Homer, in the Odyssey, I should say. Just as an example, you've got the proem here, where he is not named until line 21. Also, if you look at the second half of the Odyssey carefully, when he is revealing himself to people, family and enemies on Ithaca, not once does he ever actually use his own name when he's revealing his identity. This is deliberate. This is a deliberate choice. The naming or not naming of Odysseus is a way of indicating his connection with his personal identity. In some ways, you could think of it like this. In the latter part of the Odyssey, when he's being reunited with his family, he is, in a sense, reclaiming his identity as a part of a community. At the start of the epic, he is entirely, maximally separated from that communal identity, and the namelessness of Odysseus is one way of signifying that. In episode 2, we'll see that there's also wordplay on his name. We don't get that in the first 43 lines. Here, we've simply got the man, and if you look at how he is characterized, he's the man of many ways, polytropon, or complicated man in Emily Wilson's translation. And you'll notice that this phrase of many ways, in Greek polytropon, starts off a whole string of descriptors that focus on the idea of manyness. He is a man of many ways, polytropon, many journeys he wandered, polyplankthē. Many people, he saw their cities and knew their minds, polon danthropon in line 3. Line 4, many things on the sea. He suffered pains in his heart, pola dogen pontoi. This is a way of indicating his versatility, I guess, but really it's the namelessness of Odysseus that is the more... that's the thematic element here that is dealt with most consistently throughout the epic as a whole. And there is some bibliography, if you look at the annotations, on both the namelessness of Odysseus. Goldhill has written a chapter in his book The Poet's Voice on the use and omission of Odysseus's name and the way it relates to his identity. The idea of these roots of... the idea of manyness is dealt with in a 1982 article by the late Pietro Pucci. Goldhill also touches on that as well. You'll see here, if you look at the bibliography in the annotations, you'll see I've given some entry points into general topics. This is certainly not thorough. This is simply an article or a book on certain major topics in the proem, and if you want to find more bibliography on any of these topics, you need to look at the items I've listed here and look at what the articles they cite are. This list of references is not an endorsement of all of these articles and books exactly, although they all have their merits. Rather, it is an entry point, so that if you go into one of these and look at the bibliography in them, you will find a lot more bibliography. Okay, back to the text. So, lines 1 to 5, characterization of Odysseus himself without naming him. Now, in the next few chunks, things get quite interesting, and this is something that you won't really find in published commentaries on the Odyssey. What you get here is essentially they do give you an idea. If you look at lines 10 and 11, find a place to begin, goddess, Zeus's daughter, tell us to. At that time, all the others, all those that had escaped total destruction, they were at home. The war, they'd escaped it. And the sea. Only him, he, didn't have his homecoming and his wife. We're given a starting point for the story here, and that's what line 10 is all about. Find a place to begin, goddess. Find a place to start the story. And what that implies is that the previous lines 6 to 9, represent the past tense. They are the backstory, the background. So we've got this characterization of Odysseus, then we've got the past. What happened to all of Odysseus' companions? They all died. This is why he is without his communal identity, because he has no companions. He's by himself. So the past tense in lines 6 to 9, then lines 10 to 16 give you the setting at the start of the story. So we move from past in lines 6 to 9 to present in lines 10 to 15. And we're told how all of the other heroes who fought at Troy, they had got home, they'd escaped the sea, they survived, except for the ones who didn't. And Odysseus himself, he is 10 years after the end of the war, he is still lacking his day of homecoming, because he is on Calypso's island, and she wants him to be her husband. So that brings us into the present tense. This is the setting at the start of Book 1. This is where the story begins. But then we get into some other interesting things. Lines 16 to 20... let's say 16 to 21. This takes us a little bit into the future. When the year came, as the seasons rolled round, in which they wove it, the gods, to go home to Ithaca, even there he wasn't free of his labours, even among his family. The gods all pitied him, except Poseidon. He stayed wrathful permanently at godlike Odysseus until he reached his country, and you'll see in the last line there, on the screen I've put it in bold, Odysseus finally gets a name as we move into the future tense. So this is stuff that's going to happen in the story of the Odyssey. This is stuff that hasn't happened yet. He's going to get home to Ithaca. He is going to deal with the labours and troubles that he finds there. And Poseidon stays wrathful permanently at godlike Odysseus until he reached his country. So this takes us into the future. You could even, at a pinch, say that this takes us into the future beyond the end of the Odyssey, because the reference to Poseidon and his wrath at Odysseus in line 20, Poseidon, he stayed wrathful permanently. This hints at some events that follow the story of the Odyssey in the future, in the future. Poseidon, we are told in Book 11, the prophet Tiresias foretells that Odysseus is still going to be hounded by the god Poseidon until he goes on another journey sometime in the future and makes sacrifices to Poseidon at a new altar, and all sorts of stuff is going to happen there, and then maybe there are other stories surrounding that as well. We're not told that explicitly, but still, as far as Tiresias' prophecy puts it, that is in the future beyond the end of the Odyssey. So we've got actually 4 elements of a temporal framework here. Just to recap, lines 6 to 9, the past tense. His companions all died. Lines 10 to 15, this is where things are, this is where people are at the start of the story. And lines 16 to 21, this is what's going to happen in the story, yet to happen, and also maybe a hint at some things that are going to happen after the end of the story. Now this is significant because it shows that the narrator isn't making stuff up as they go. They've already made up their minds where the story begins and where the story ends. And that's what we've got here. Pause for coffee. So, those are the main chunks of the opening section of the Odyssey. Now, there are some literary questions that you will find tackled in the scholarship. If you go into the scholarship, the articles and books that I've provided in the annotations, you'll see that they don't talk about this. What they do tend to talk about are things like, where does the proem end? Which I personally find a very boring question. Or oh yeah, in the indications of the past tense in lines 6 to 9, why is this so apparently incomplete? Why is this such an inadequate account of Odysseus' wanderings? And plenty of scholars complain about these 4 lines, lines 6 to 9, saying that they are indications that the poets are doing a completely botched job. I beg to differ, obviously. This is a carefully worked out chronological frame for the entire story. The narrator is not focused on all of Odysseus' wanderings. It's simply wanting to lay out this chronological framework, past, present, future. And that's what we get here. Still, just to give you an indication, here is what Stephanie West says in her commentary, in the Oxford commentary, on line 10. And I quote, "The poet no doubt took pride in his flashback technique. He did not need to begin at the beginning, but could start at a point relatively near the end, and thus concentrate the action within a period of approximately 40 days. He does not specify a particular event as his starting point, and there is a smooth and natural transition to the description of Odysseus' circumstances." Well, I would say that this description of Odysseus' circumstances is precisely what we're getting in lines 10 to 15. I mean, really, the questions that you'll find in the scholarship over where exactly the proem ends is because of this preoccupation with wanting to make sure that the proem gives a complete picture of the past, of what's happened in the past, which is obviously, I mean, if you look at it more broadly, the whole thing is not just laying out the past, it's laying out a complete chronological framework. So I think most of that scholarship is quite misguided. Now, there are some genuine questions here. Linguistic questions. In line 10, hamothen, I've translated it, I've kind of loosely translated it. Hamothen, well, I'll just read out what Stephanie West says about that as well. Hamothen, from whatever point you will in this story. Nowhere else in Homer does any form of hamos occur. It is disputed whether it is an atticism or an archaism, and that's pretty much all she says. There is a comment in Stanford's commentary as well. Let me just remind myself what he says. W.B. Stanford, in the mid-1900s, of these events, from some point at least, tell us also now. This is his translation of line 10. Hamos is, according to a scholiast, an equivalent of tis, so it's an indefinite dactic marker. The poet, faced with the immense mass of epic material, needs the muse's help in choosing a beginning at some point. Again, I think this is quite misguided because, like I've tried to point out, the first lines 6 to 21 lay out a complete chronological framework. I mean, the invitation to the muse to tell us where we're going to start the story it's more symbolic than anything else. It's a way of dividing the past of lines 6 to 9 from the present of lines 11 to 15. So, yeah, I find a lot of that scholarship quite misguided. Now, there are some genuine questions. What exactly is the sense of kai in line 10? ἀπέτεισε. I've translated it, tell us to. Stephanie West translates it. Actually, she leaves that unclear. The force of kai is not quite clear. Is it tell us to, share your knowledge with us, or is it tell us as well as others, an appeal to precedent? The former seems more likely. You don't have to decide this. It's one of those things that can safely stay unclear. It's adverbial. Exactly what is the adverb modifying? We don't necessarily need to pin that down. There is a much more important kai coming up in a few lines later anyway. So, We had also better talk about some formal aspects of a proem, just briefly. What is a proem? It's an introductory paragraph, as I mentioned. This is an anglicized form of the Greek word proemion, which is a tricky term because proemion can also be used of a hymnic prelude. In early Greek epic, it was typical for an epic performance to be preceded by a hymn to one god or another, or multiple gods. And the Homeric hymns are the most famous examples of these hymns, but they're not attached to an actual epic narrative. You have, even though they're quite substantial and actually contain narratives of their own in some cases. We do have a few poems where we do actually have a hymnic prelude connected to a narrative. Notably, in the Hesiodic Theogony, where we've got the first 100 lines or so are a hymn to the Muses, and then we get a proem fairly similar to the one we've got here, and then it transitions into genealogies of the gods and so on. There's also the Works and Days has a short hymn to Zeus, but then there's no proem, it just dives straight in. There's also a 5th century poem, it's elegiac, not hexameter, Simonides' Plataea Ode. The fragments were first published in 1992, which the most substantial fragment, I think it's the most substantial one, I think it's fragment 11 in West's edition, starts off with a substantial hymn to Achilles as a divine figure, as a hero. And then we have a transition with a kind of quasi-proem into the story of the Battle of Plataea in 480 BCE. So those are 3 examples where we do actually have a hymnic prelude attached to an epic performance. We don't have that here, we only have the proem, but you can be reasonably confident that in an actual performance of the Odyssey, there would have been a hymn of some description preceding these opening lines. So that's one formal element of a proem. When we actually get into the text that we've got here, the main elements are, firstly, the invocation of the muse in the opening line, tell me of the man muse, and the naming of a theme. And then we have a relative clause. I haven't actually translated it as a relative clause. Literally, tell me of the man muse of many ways, who wandered a great deal, wandered many journeys. And this is a typical feature, this expanding relative clause. We do have a number of parallels for proems to compare to this. Most of the scholarship just compares the Iliad proem, which is, again, way too narrow, because we've got lots of others. And the Iliad proem is quite dissimilar to this one in some ways. We do have a museification there, we do have the relative clause that expands on the main theme, but we don't, for example, have the second invocation of the muse. In the Odyssey, we've got that at line 10. Find a place to begin, goddess, Zeus's daughter, tell us too. This is actually a typical feature. You don't get that in the Iliad, though, so you won't find it in lots of articles skip over that. But you will find this double-barreled muse invocation in the proem of the Hesiodic Catalogue of Women. You will also find it in... There are 2 fragments of the opening of the Little Iliad, and there's an article by Scafolio in Greek, Roman, and Byzantine Studies, 2006, I think, where he argues that this is another case of a double-barreled muse invocation. He doesn't compare the Odyssey, he compares Virgil instead, but that looks like it may well be another example of a double-barreled muse invocation. But it's the Catalogue of Women, the Hesiodic Catalogue of Women, is the closest parallel, in formal terms, it's the closest parallel to the one that we've got in the Odyssey. And I think I can't remember offhand whether Harden and Kelly talk about the Catalogue of Women in much detail, but that is a good article to look at for formal elements of a proem. So a fairly short opening paragraph, the hymnic prelude, which we don't have here, invocation of the muse, naming a theme, man, and a relative clause that expands on that theme, a little bit of discursive material, a renewed invocation of the muse, which we've got here in line 10, more discursive material, and then gradually you transition into actual narrative. And Poseidon is the segue. Poseidon in lines 20 to 25 is the segue. He doubles up. He's an indication of Odysseus' future, distant future, the inland journey. And also, his absence from Olympus is the occasion for the divine council, which is the first event in the actual narrative of the Odyssey. So let's move on to that episode. The gods are in the halls of Zeus. They're gathered in a crowd, line 27. And among them Zeus began the speeches, father of men and gods, because he remembered in his heart blameless Aegisthus. Agamemnon's son did it to him, famous all over. Orestes killed him. So this would have been a familiar backstory for ancient Greek audiences. The backstory is that Agamemnon, who was the leader of the Greek forces at Troy, when he comes home, he finds that things have gone a bit pear-shaped. His wife, Clytemnestra, has been having an affair with Aegisthus, who is a relative, and Aegisthus and Clytemnestra kill Agamemnon. They murder him once he gets home. So he has a very unfortunate homecoming. And then later on, 7 years later, I think, in Homer's chronology, Agamemnon's son, Orestes, comes back and takes vengeance for his father's murder. And he kills Aegisthus and Clytemnestra, and that's what this is about. And then the rest of our opening lines are Zeus talking about Aegisthus. Tut tut, what are to do? Tut tut is my translation of O popoi. The mortals blame the gods. They say it's from us bad things come. Then he goes, he talks a little bit about justice, the concept of justice and morality, and then he starts talking about Aegisthus. Aegisthus, for example, beyond what's laid down, Atreus' son, he had sex with that man's wife. He killed him on his homecoming. He knew total destruction, because we told him beforehand, because would be a better translation there, actually. We sent Hermes, the keen-eyed one who killed Argos. Don't kill him, don't court his wife. It's from Orestes avenge will come for Atreus' son once he grows up and wants to return to his country. So he spoke Hermes, but he didn't change Aegisthus' mind, though he meant to do a good turn. And now he's paid the full penalty. So, this speech does several jobs as well. The opening of the Odyssey is absolutely packed with material. It's so intricate. What jobs are going on here? Okay, first, we are being given an indication of what justice looks like in the world of the Odyssey. Justice means revenge. If someone does something wrong, they have to suffer something bad. That's justice. That's what happens to Aegisthus. And this is programmatic for what's going to happen to people who do bad things in the Odyssey as well. The suitors who are infesting Odysseus' house, courting his wife, they have to suffer for justice to be served. Second, we are being introduced to the concept of, or to the importance, the central importance of family and household in the Odyssey. This is absolutely essential to the subject of Odysseus' homecoming. For Odysseus to have a successful homecoming, there has to be security, and security not just for the well-being of the family members, but also security for the transition from one generation to the next. Odysseus has to have a son, Telemachus, who can succeed to his place. And in the parallel that we've got here, we've got Orestes, Agamemnon's son, ends up taking vengeance for his father's murder, but also he represents a continuation of the family line. Aegisthus threatened the continuity of the family of Agamemnon from one generation to the next. He actually married his wife so that there could not be any children. He murdered Agamemnon. So he did everything possible to try and interrupt the succession from one generation to the next. But because justice in the end gets served, succession does successfully happen. So the concept of inheritance, of the continuity of the household, is an integral part of what family means in the Odyssey as well. It's not enough for Odysseus to get home safely. He also has to have a successful family line. We have to be shown that there is going to be succession from one generation to the next, and that's why Telemachus is so important in the Odyssey, because he is what shows us the future of Odysseus' family line, the continuity of the household. So that's a second job. Third job, we have to have models for what things look like when they go right and what things look like when they go wrong. We need to have that kind of conceptual framework. When things go right, people get home from the Trojan War successfully. There are no problems. Their families are successful. There are going to be marriages and so forth and so forth. And that is precisely what we see in books 3 and 4 of the Odyssey. The families of Nestor and Menelaus show us what a successful family looks like without the problems that face people like Odysseus and Agamemnon. But we also have to be shown what things look like when they go wrong, and that's what Agamemnon's family is all about in the Odyssey. It gets used, not just here, but repeatedly throughout the whole of the Odyssey, as a paradigm for what happens when things go wrong. So we're being shown this is what a happy ending will look like for Odysseus. It will look like Nestor and Menelaus' households, and this is what an unhappy ending will look like. It will look like Agamemnon's family. I mean, even if Orestes does come back and take revenge in the end, still, I mean, it's not good to get murdered by your wife when you get home. And so we have these repeated parallels drawn with Agamemnon's family throughout the Odyssey. This is why Agamemnon's family is right here in the opening paragraphs of the Odyssey, because it's an illustration of what things look like when everything goes pear-shaped. Now, there were other things I wanted to talk about, but I can see that we've reached the half-hour mark. I will just very briefly note then that back in lines 18 and 19, there is an interpretive problem there. This is the lines, like I said, 18 to 19. When the year came as the seasons rolled round, in which they wove it, the gods, to go home to Ithaca, even there he wasn't free of his labours, even among his family. Now, there is an interpretive problem there. It's not clear whether this phrase, in Greek, oudentha perfugmenos en aethlon kai metahoisi philology, it's not clear whether that is meant to be a parenthesis, which is how it's punctuated in the Greek text, edited by Thiel, or an apodosis, a then clause. When the gods wove for him to go home, then this happened. That would be an apodosis. And that's how West punctuates it in his edition of the Greek text. You'll find that different translations adopt one version or the other as well. For example, Emily Wilson's translation has when the year rolled round, blah, 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 his troubles still went on. The man was friendless. So that is a then clause. That's the apodosis. Meanwhile, Richmond Lattimore's translation has not even then, that is to say, when the gods wove for him to go home, not even then was he free of his trials, nor among his own people. So it's really the meaning of enther, which is the problem here. Enther is a deictic particle which can mean either there or then. And the question is, does it mean at that time, when the gods wove for him to go home, at that time he wasn't among his family or his friends? Or does it mean when he got home to Ithaca, then he wasn't to be free of his labours and among his family, or even among his family? The meaning of kai is also a bit dubious because, like I mentioned, Lattimore translates that as nor, which is, I don't think that's really defensible in the Greek. But Like I said, we've passed the half-hour mark, so I'd better stop here. Do remember to take a look at the annotations. I've got a list in the annotations of notable textual variations. Most of them are just cosmetic, apart from that question over in lines 18 and 19. There's a whole bunch of bibliography, entry points into scholarship on the proem, an article on the meaning of enther, and a list of commentaries, introductions to Homeric language, and editions of the Greek text. So, if this has been any use to you, do let me know. I hope it will be of some interest to those who are reading the Odyssey for the first time, and we'll see how far we get. 243 episodes if we do 50 lines per episode. Wish me luck. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.